Hello and welcome to another Out of Spec podcast episode. You join me and Brandon, and we are talking all about EVgo this episode. We're going to do a couple episodes on EVgo. I want to talk about their Renew program in a future episode where they're updating their network, but it almost seems like EVgo needs Renew for their brand new stations, which are already failing us. Just yesterday, I had a bad experience. Brandon, you've come across some really bad ones. So I kind of want to document what's going on with these new sites because they all seem to have a pretty much the same layout. Let's talk about the layout, talk about the units, and talk about the problems we're finding.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic premise is that these sites, they have a single Delta 350 kilowatt dispenser, single cabinet. They can do two vehicles on that dispenser rather than the Signet sites that you have to have separate dispensers for each vehicle. So the Signet is a dual output dispenser. And then they typically have two of their 100 kilowatt city chargers that have both CHAdeMO and CCS. And even though they can do simultaneous charging, they're typically set up in a way that they're only intended to do one output each. And some of these sites also have the built-in Tesla adapter side as well.
Right. So let's talk about that Delta versus Signet situation first, because we have sites here in Denver that pretty much all of them are getting at least two 100 kilowatt city chargers, the Delta units. I really like these units, by the way.
They're pretty solid. Yeah.
Dead silent in operation. I know you've seen some issues with them, but I've actually had to use them in backup scenarios, and they've worked great. They work well in the cold. They have just air cooled cables, which is perfect. It's a really nice unit right there. The thing is,
200 amp cables, which are actually appropriate for the application.
Yeah, 200 amp cables aren't always bad, and we'll have a whole episode on that. But having a 200 amp cable size to a 100 kilowatt branded charger, that's perfect. That's all you need.
It's fine.
Yep. And so I use them from time to time when I have to. Unfortunately, I have to. We have sites that then have the Signet chargers attached to them, and then the Delta. The Signets have off-board, sort of cabinet-based style charging with dispensers, located. And typically there's 4 dispensers at these. So you get, you can charge 4 cars at once. Each cabinet, 2 cabinets are, what am I trying to say? Each cabinet is linked to 2 dispensers in the Signet case. So you do load share when you park next to
Well, I think it's 2 cabinets typically. So it's 2 cabinets are linked to get a 350 pool, and then you have 2 dispensers then attached to it. So it's essentially a one-to-one relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, as well, there's typically 4 cabinets at a site, at least here in Colorado. So we have two links.
2 paired links. Yeah.
Yes, that's the way to do it. The way to describe it. Thank you. And that's pretty complicated and clunky to install, actually.
Lots to go wrong.
Yep, a lot to go wrong for sure. So I've seen an increase of them preferring to use their Delta hardware, which is a 350 kilowatt dispenser with just 1 cabinet off board.
And
that's
2 outputs out of the same dispenser.
Right. So you can basically put a dispenser between 2 parking spaces, and you can charge 2 cars at once. And they run the Huber-Schuner cables, the 500 amp liquid cooling, whole bit. These actually output 540 amps. That's why I like them. They'll just run flat out at 540. And, it's a really nice unit, but we're starting, they started to install these, a year ago, maybe?
I think Charlotte had one of the first in the country, as far as I can tell, that was installed end of January, February-ish of 2022. And we're now right about a year later, and the entire site's down.
Right. And I'm noticing it here. So why don't you tell us, what have you experienced in Charlotte with EVgo, with these brand new sites? What's going on?
Yeah, so there are 2 sites that have essentially the same configuration of the single Delta dispenser, 175 each or 350, 1 output with the single cabinet, as we just discussed, and the 2 city units. So there's 2 of them in Charlotte, and one of them, as I mentioned, is about 11-ish months old, and one of them is about 2 months old. And over Christmas, I actually discovered that the 2-month-old site was completely down. At first, it was just the city units that were down, and the 350 kilowatt unit would actually show as available briefly, and then you'd show up and it would actually have an error on the screen, which is different than I discovered at the other Charlotte site, which actually would let you activate it. So the Tuckasegee location, the first one, the 2-month-old site, that one, it would show as available, but actually did have an error on the screen, so you couldn't even try to start charging. But the Carmel Commons site, the 11-month-old site, that one, it would show as available, but you would try to use it and it would just try to connect and time out, essentially. The vehicle would time out. The charger would actually never time out, in my experience. But it would seem to not recognize that it was plugged in, as far as I could tell. And it was down completely days before EVgo marked the unit as unavailable, even though they knew the other 2 city units were unavailable and marked them as such. So I saw multiple people in my 2 times there in the past 2 days that showed up expecting to be able to charge. I saw a Polestar. I saw an even EQE SUV manufacturer car. I saw ID4. I saw Lightning. I saw all these different vehicles all showing up expecting to be able to charge. And you can just see the despair in their face when I tell them, sorry, none of them are working. And they just have to figure it out. And luckily, there are other options in Charlotte. But you should be able to show up to a site that shows is available and be able to charge, even if it's degraded, at least you can charge.
And that's the big point, is that, okay, we understand sites go down. Sites will go down. If you post it,
it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Right. It's, you got to post it on PlugShare. You got to put it on your app. You got to send the signal to all the cars that are paying for your back end data. Just not come here. And you know what? You got screens on your chargers. List all the other nearby chargers someone could go to. There's
That's a great idea.
Things you can do to help the EV driver. EVgo claims to be the most driver-centric fast charging company. I'm failing to see that. Truly, unless you're driver centric around me, because I can shoot them a text message because I know the people there, and I'm like, guys, your plug scores a 1 point something here. 1 million people haven't checked in. Here's a link to Brandon's tweet. What the hell? And they're like, oh my God, offline immediately, tech dispatch. I'm like, why do I have to do that?
Like, you are not their operations manager of sorts, but you're essentially acting as one. And the most aggravating part is that people were posting on PlugShare that this entire site is down, in addition to Rate Your Charge. And EVgo is responding to people on PlugShare, so they know it's down. There's not even like a lack of information flow, or no one tried to charge there, so they just assume, oh, it shows available. We just don't have any sessions. But that also should raise some red flags at an otherwise normally busy site.
Right. And so I had the same experience here in Colorado just the other day. I ran the EQS in our Hogback Challenge, and I was going to try and stretch it to the last possible 350 kilowatt charger on my way back to Fort Collins. I wanted to see how the EQS would charge, if preconditioning would work. So I loaded in an EVgo 350 kilowatt site. Didn't think anything about it because I used it 2 weeks ago. It's a Delta site, brand new, beautiful site, and roll out there. Yeah, and everything's online. Like, it looks good.
Yeah.
I should have checked PlugShare, which I didn't. But I went to the charger, and there was a mechanical issue or a physical issue with the handles, the Huber Sooner cables. They wouldn't engage and latch. I could get it in. I know it had its proximity signal going because the car would make some noises, but as soon as it tried to latch and lock the cable in, it wouldn't do it. And it wouldn't do it for both sides of the charger. Now, that's no issue with the car because every other CCS handles worked great. So I loaded up PlugShare, and everyone else was like, we can't get the fast charger to latch in our car. So it also threw up a warning on the charger, which I'm going to try and pull up, which I've never seen before. And it's error 014004. It says, dispenser protection alarm, please unplug charger gun. And so the charger knew it was being plugged into something. It knew that it wasn't latching properly, and it wanted you to try again. Meanwhile, through the last 2 weeks that this has been an issue, EVgo has been responding on PlugShare. They own PlugShare. They know that this is an issue, and the charger still marked as online, totally unusable. So then I was like, oh crap. Like, I was late for a meeting, and I'm like, I'm full EQS mode, late for a meeting, need to get a little bit of juice. And I was just going to get home at 0% state of charge because I just had to get to this thing. And so then I'm just stuck on a 100 kilowatt Delta unit after fiddling around with the 350 because I could not go anywhere else. I had no more range. And,
Hmm.
I was just like, this is crazy. All the info's here. So, of course, I sent a picture. First of all, I tweeted about it on Rate Your Charge. I love Rate Your Charge. It's so great. We get all the data. So that's my first step. And then I'm like,
Yep.
well, EVgo is not responding to anyone on, drivers. So let me just call some friends over there. So I sent some texts over. Within 5 minutes, the station was marked as offline and a tech was being sent on an ASAP visit. This is the crazy part. As much as I appreciate having that direct connection to them,
You
and
shouldn't need it.
I shouldn't need it, and I shouldn't like I'm not the guy to do this. Like you have all the data,
Yeah.
EVgo. And I told them this too. I'm like, guys, look, like I understand that I make YouTube videos and you want to, obviously they're just friends of mine. Like they're really cool. The people that I text are like, oh, this sucks. What's going on? They're trying to do better inside the company. Um,
Yes.
but how is it that EVgo has been around for 9, 10 years, something like this now, and
Hmm.
they still
They were
don't
one of the
know
first.
they don't know how to mark a charger offline when users say it doesn't work?
That should be like one of the first processes that you develop is what happens when it's reported that there's an issue? How do we handle that? And how do we essentially check it? Because if
And
you have one report that something's wrong, it could just be that someone's not an experienced user and they're doing something wrong. That is entirely possible. But if you have multiple reports from multiple drivers with multiple different kinds of EVs, that should be setting off all sorts of alarms, or even just basing it on the plug score. As broken as the plug score system is, if enough people mark a site as unable to charge, it drops that score pretty quickly, and anything below a 5 should be setting off emails to like the entire company, basically.
yeah, totally agree. I mean, I don't think they realize how big of a deal this is. And in the eyes of the plug score, technically the site's a 10 out of 10. But our users, we've really changed the way people are using plug
Yeah.
share based off of some videos. I can go in.
Hmm.
I don't even know how half the people are that are on there. I know some of the drivers, right? You start to get to
Hmm.
know everyone who drives an EV around. But there's like some people that are like, tried connector A, bad. Tried connector B, bad. I'm like, yes, these are the people.
They're watching and they're
Yes,
learning, but then PlugShare is combining those.
right. But they didn't on this one. And so this
Okay.
was really great to see, like, okay, based off of our coverage, we drove this score into the ground. But it didn't actually make a difference. It took me having to call someone or text someone, I
Yeah.
should say. And so that's just frustrating. So you've experienced these two issues with the brand new
Hmm.
EVgo sites with
Yeah.
the small charger and the big charger. My understanding was there was some input power issue to one of the sites, is sort of the
Okay.
rumor that I've heard. But then they were able to
Seems plausible.
fix it relatively quickly after we brought it to their attention. So what do you think is going on here, Brandon?
I mean, it could be, again, a connection issue potentially, that sometimes you have to retorque these connections after the initial installation, and maybe that didn't happen,
Yeah, but don't
especially
you
at
think
that
they
kind of
should be
power level.
monitoring? I heard maybe input voltage on line one was really low, is what I
Yeah.
heard for one of the sites. And I don't know if I should share that or not, but I am. And I was just
Hmm.
like, how do you not know that like 5 seconds after it happens?
That should be setting off errors and taking the site off, or at least showing it as unavailable, or maybe doing kind of the shadow offline mode that we experienced in Florida,
Yep.
where the site is so degraded that they marked it as unavailable. But if you showed up and you had like an EVgo card or you used a credit card, you could still charge, but it was just slow.
That's the perfect solution, is like
Yeah.
try and deter everyone from going to the locations that don't work, but also try to support them if they happen to go there.
Yeah. If they show up, you can then still charge. It's not great, but it's an option.
Right.
And that also will give you the data because people will show up regardless because it's on PlugShare, it's on the apps, it's built in the cars.
And
Most
people use
users are
them
not
every
checking
day.
this. Yeah, most people are not checking the status before they go to a station, especially if it's their local charger of sorts that they're just using for their normal driving. They
Right.
just go there. But then if you see people showing up and using it and everything appears normal, you can maybe restore it back to full status. And maybe it was a false alarm, a temporary problem. Who knows? Like you maybe don't need to roll a truck, but the first step should be putting these stations offline to stop people from going to them and relying on them.
Right, totally agree. And with forced uptime requirements, especially coming with a lot of this NEVI funding and other
Hmm.
situations, that's going to only happen more. these
Yes.
charging companies are going to be so resistive to taking chargers offline because it penalizes them. And so that's why
Yes.
I'm not actually a fan of this uptime reporting requirement,
It's
because
just going to game the system.
it's people are just going to game the system, and the same people who lose every time, the EV drivers, are just going to keep getting in bad situations.
Yeah. And I mean, it all comes down to these EV drivers that are making these decisions, and it shows.
Yep,
It's
they
just
need
madness.
more EV drivers involved with charging. I'll talk a little bit about XL Energy and my experience with
Mhm.
them in a future podcast. But ultimately, we're seeing brand new EVgo sites. We've seen
Mhm.
brand new Electrify America sites fail. We've seen brand
Yep.
new charge point sites fail. Um, Maybe we should stop, and maybe we should just get power run to sites, because that takes forever. And
Yep.
maybe we should just make sure everything works, or think about building more resiliency in your charging deployment.
Mhm.
Even a small battery buffer or something can really eliminate a lot of input power problems from the grid. Yes, your
Yes.
costs go up, but the EV driver experience goes up as well. And
Yeah.
I think, a lot of these charging companies just don't know what the heck is going on here. They're just buying hardware and trying to slap it in the ground. And it
It's
obviously isn't working.
No, I mean, you look at Tesla even, and you look at the input voltage that they can accept, and it's roughly 380 volts to like 480 volts. So they can have a pretty degraded grid connection. I mean, the actual intent is that they can use the same hardware around the world,
Yes.
but they can have a very degraded grid connection, and it's just going to derate the site versus taking it down completely because the hardware can handle it.
Yep. I mean, Tesla just gets it, right? Very rarely do you roll up and you see a version 3 supercharger offline.
Hmm.
Early days, they had some software bugs. That's all been fixed. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen a
Yeah.
version 3 completely offline. So,
Those issues were only for like a month or two anyway, and it
it was
was when
just,
they had
yeah,
single digit number of sites. It was a non-issue essentially.
right. It was just when, North Dakota had some of the first version 3 superchargers, and we would
Yeah.
roll up and they would only have a bank of 4 on, and the other bank was
Hmm.
off. And it must have been some software coding. Who knows? But either way, EVgo really, I mean, look, I like the people at EVgo. I truly believe EVgo actually wants to make a better charging experience. I'm not convinced about their main competitor, Electrify America. They seem to not care, truly.
Yeah, but EVgo
EVgo,
seems to have a lot of people that genuinely care and are actually pretty involved in the EV world, and they're kind of going to battle against some of their coworkers to an extent to get
yes.
things right.
And but it shouldn't be that way. It's they
No.
just need like a reliability top, and like if reliability isn't top, communicate to the driver as soon as there's a problem. So I hope that these videos make some sort of difference. I know people at
Yep.
EVgo will be watching. Appreciate you guys watching, and you have to do
Yes.
better. You cannot send drivers to sites that aren't marked as offline, or I should say that are offline that aren't marked as offline. And I want to stop texting you about it. I'd like you to find the problem before we do. That would be so nice.
And the
So,
data is there. Just use the data.
yep, just use the data. Anyway, thanks for watching another Out of Spec podcast episode. We have plenty more on charging topics to get into forever, it seems like. So keep liking, keep subscribing, keep watching, and we'll see you on another one soon. Bye bye.